Welcome to or welcome back to RICO 12. This is Justin. I am the host of the RICO 12 podcast, and I am a recovering addict and a son of God. Grateful to have you here. Grateful to have you back here during the series that we're doing, the Journey in Recovery series, which is something that I recorded actually back in 2019 when I was hosting another podcast called Journey Through Life. And that was a long-form conversation interview style podcast. It was not recovery related, although I was actively working my recovery during that time. And at that time, in the end of 2019, I felt compelled by my higher power to do a series on the Journey Through Life podcast called Journey in Recovery. In this series, I interviewed 16 people over a 3-month period on each of the 12 steps of recovery. It was during this period that my own recovery walk was radically changed, and my vision of what the steps can do for anyone, anywhere, from any background, was drastically opened up. It was after this series that the idea of the RICO 12 Speaker Meeting podcast came to be. It was in this series that I realized just how powerful the steps of recovery are. It was in this series that my higher power opened up huge new ideas to me. The concept of firing my old concept of lowercase g God and hiring a new capital G God, and the practice of two-way prayer are just two of the major game changers that came to me during that time, and that continue to shape and reshape my walk with God, with my fellows. During the month of December, I'm replaying those episodes of the Journey in Recovery series with minor edits and rebranding so that the listening audience can get more background of several of our RICO 12 guests who had more time to share their stories here, as well as to get introduced to others who have not been RICO 12 guests, and also to learn more about how the problem is so similar no matter the addiction, and how the solution is the same no matter the addiction. So if you wish to donate, if you find RICO 12 of value and you wish to donate to the cause, you can click on the links in the show notes. Also, if you want to follow us on WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, so on and so forth, all of that information is there in the show notes also, and we'd love to have you join us. And if you find value in RICO 12, please consider rating and reviewing in Apple Podcasts. It's a great way to work our 12th step and continue to share this message with more people. The month of December so far has been massive in the growth of the podcast. So many downloads are happening, and so grateful to those of you who are sharing this message of this experience, strength, and hope that we are all trying to carry in the RICO 12 podcast. In this episode 138, we will be hearing the experience, strength, and hope of Joe C. in his living in Step 7 in his life. Now, a heads up on this one, the sound quality is a little rough in spots on this episode. The online recording did not come through great, but the content is amazing. So please listen past the flaws in the sound and to the beauty of what is being said. In this conversation, Joe C. talks about a beautiful, long relationship with his wife and his awakening late in life to his own issues, her support and help, her death, and how the steps of recovery and the program have and do help him see that it keeps getting better. He also talks about one of my new favorite 4-letter words, stay. You will gain a ton from this episode as you listen and learn, and then apply what you learn. So anyways, sit back, enjoy this. Do some housework, yard work, kick back, work out, take a walk, whatever you do while listening to podcasts. Enjoy this and gather in what your higher power is trying to teach you at this time. Here we go. I am sitting here with Joe. And Joe, let's start this off. Introduce yourself as if you were in a 12-step meeting, how you would typically introduce yourself, and then we'll go from there.
I'm Joe, a sexaholic, and many other icks, but this happens to be the one I'm in at the moment. I'm in AA as well. I've been in program in both since March 29th, 2012, which was the beginning of a new life for me that I didn't even realize, and I'm realizing more now. Love the program. I've been continuously sober well in advance of the sobriety definition of SA, but certainly sober. Not perfect, and growing.
Hmm. Well, very good. Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. Tell me a little bit about your journey into an addiction umbrella. Tell me about maybe your first experiences and then when you kind of had that aha moment of, I think I've got a problem here that I'm not able to manage on my own.
Well, as I look back over my life, I have done that a lot in the program. I've been through the steps countless times, really, because they're a constant cycle. I can see my craziness going back as far as kindergarten. I was a control freak. My mother was a home economics teacher in the little town that I came from in Kansas. And I was in kindergarten. She asked the kindergartner teacher how I was. So Joe Thomas is great. When we want to go in, he lines all the kids up by height, tells them what to do, keeps them in order. And then I realized that another time is in kindergarten, you have these little blankets or little rugs you lay on nap time. I always moved my rug behind a little girl so I could look up her skirt, and I had no idea why I was doing it. I go back all the way to there. I had wonderful parents. I can't say anything wrong about them. They were older. My dad was 46. My mother was 36 when I was born. They were perfect parents, not necessarily perfect people, but perfect parents. And the minute I stepped out of the door, I felt I didn't belong. I was lost. I didn't know how to deal with people. I didn't know how to make friends. It wasn't that I was a shy, particularly. I felt uncomfortable. So, as with most addicts, they either go one of two ways. They either become pushed and driven to be successful, or they kind of fall back into the shadows. Well, I was the former. So I was the great student. I was valedictorian in my class, good at sports, good at music, won a gold medal in the state of Kansas on the clarinet. I took piano lessons from two teachers, the whole business. Went to the University of Kansas, was there for a couple of years in pre-med, decided life sciences didn't work for me. So classic addict. The campus at the University of Kansas is on hills, unlike the rest of Kansas that's flat. I walked down the hills to the Lawrence, Kansas. I came to the nearest recruiter's office, and I enlisted in the Army at the beginning of the Vietnam War. And the guy said, well, bright guys like you, there's a group called the Army Security Agency, but you have to enlist for 4 years. So we go being what it was. I did, and I spent 4 years in the service, and that brought me to New England and to the Army Security Agency training in school. I finished first in all my courses, was trained in computers, and did that, and that became my lifelong career. So everything that I do intensely. Then I got to working for a company, even while I was in the service, working 80 plus hours a week, 40 plus hours in the service. And I know there's only 168 hours in the week. And that was commuting and sleeping. That's the same kind of addictive tendency. After I got out, I went to work for that company. I married a lady that I met there. We dated for about 4 years and then married, and we were married for almost 50 years, and she passed away in June. Cheer. And I'm happy to say the last almost 7.5 years of our marriage, I was in the program, and I became a better person, I think, and finished us off in a recovery mode. She, by the way, just missed her 50th anniversary in AA. Was living with a person who was in recovery the whole time and I took her to meetings. I saw all the slogans on the wall, interesting, told her often that these were great programs, but the price you had to pay to get in was too high. And I didn't know I was working on paying the price all along. So I was a workaholic. I smoked. And it was nothing for me. I was intensely working to smoke 2 to 4 packs of cigarettes in a day. You know you're a workaholic when I can say I've seen the sun rise 3 times without going to bed. that kind of craziness. Didn't drink a lot, but when I drank to oblivion. Not a great deal of no affairs, kind of emotionally absent in the marriage. But then things changed in my work environment, and I was less directly involved in the work, so I had less intensity. So computer being what it is, I started gravitating into pornography, then masturbation. That became a dark place that I went into, and at the end, my park bench was my sofa in my family room with the lights out, with the TV on, surfing, looking for lust hits and keeping cycling until one day my wife walked up behind me and said, "What's the matter with you?" And that's the beginning. And then I came to the program and gradually got into it. I got a great sponsor that when I actually took a white chip down in Key West at an AA clubhouse. And that's when I really started. I call that my day of beginning in all the kinds of addiction, smoke, drinking, SA. I started out a bit in SAA, but while I met some wonderful people that were sober, their sobriety definition was way too soft in what they did. And then my wife, the guiding light of my life, kept looking because she was going crazy with what I was, found a lot of things, and we came across SA. I dove into that and found it to be the right place. And all of a sudden, I started making friends. I started being able to talk like I never talked before. When I talked to guys, it was, if I got beyond sports, it was a miracle. Women, they were just something that were sex objects to me, although I talked with them a bit. But every time I looked at them, they were somebody that I wanted to probably go to bed with and lusted over. And that all gradually changed. So that's a bit about who I am.
Yeah, I know that's a great backstory, and I really appreciate it. So your wife was an active AA member for nearly 50 years of her life. And
it would have been August 23rd. She died June 28th.
Wow. And you were quite involved in her program, like you said, taking her to meetings and seeing the things on the wall. But the price, you said, was too high to get in and do anything about it.
It didn't resonate with me that I had any of that.
Right. Now, was the awakening that you had any of that? Was it when your wife came up behind you?
It was actually, that was a bit of it. That caused me to get rid of all the cable channels and everything on TV, but it wasn't it completely. It happened after the Super Bowl in 2012, and she hadn't watched it, and I did. And then the next morning she came downstairs, and I made some pretty raunchy, off-colored jokes, and that's when she looked at me and said, and then we had our moment of confrontation, and she was really just scared out of her wits. And she went on the computer on her own and kept digging and digging and digging, and came across a book called Sitting in a Rowboat, Throwing Marbles at a Battleship. And we got that. And at my first blush, I sort of rejected it because what would a Mormon tell me? My prejudices. In retrospect, it turned out to be the catalyst, because there's a one piece that he put in called the ABCs of Addiction, which now I give to most of my sponsees because I tell them this is the best description of addiction I've ever read anywhere, anytime.
No, that's really, really neat. I was actually sponsoring someone through the steps, and he said, "Hey, have you ever heard of this, Sitting in a Rowboat, Throwing Marbles at a Battleship?" And I said, "That's the dumbest title to anything I've ever heard in my life." And he said, "Well, I'm going to send it to you." And it was a game changer. It really opened my eyes to a lot of things. Yeah.
And this fellow, when he wrote it, as I recall, was only 18 to 24 months in the program. He wrote these. It was just a series of things that he wrote that have been that he consolidated in, but it just so powerful. Not to replace the big book, the 12 and 12, the white book. They're the fundamental nucleus of recovery. As a matter of fact, when I sponsor guys, I make them read the big book from the beginning through Dr. Bob's story, the 12 front to back, the white book front to back. And then I said, now you've got some academics. Now we can actually talk about recovery.
So that's really, really interesting. So as you look back at your experience, I mean, you've got a lot of compulsive behaviors that have followed you from pretty much day one in your life,
Right.
that you didn't recognize as necessarily a real problem. They were just a little problem, I think.
They were just who I was, because in the most fundamental of was work, and that's how I defined myself. So I even used to say to my nieces and nephews, don't have any children of our own. And I always told my nieces and nephews, you'll meet people smarter, from wealthier families, better connected, more education. But the one thing you can do is outwork them. What I was. And I was successful. I made a good living. I didn't lose anything material except myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was fortunate enough to have a wife that, for whatever reason, loved me enough to stay with me when I was probably absent, at least emotionally. I wasn't absent physically, and I was there whenever there was a need, but I was so wound up in my work and whatever. It was only after recovery I realized what a really smart woman I was married to and how capable she was. And it wasn't that she changed. The fog lifted from me.
Yeah. Did she ever, throughout your marriage, before her approaching you and saying, hey, you got a problem, we got to do something about this, did she ever make comments to you, say, hey, Joe, have you ever considered that you just might need to work these programs here throughout those 40 years leading up to that?
No, she never did. She certainly knew that I at times overdrank, and she even gave me articles, but she never considered that I might be an alcoholic, just that I overdid.
Just that you were like a heavy periodic drinker or something like that. Huh? Interesting. So what would you consider your rock bottom to be? I mean, it sounds like you may have shared it, but just reiterate that. What was your rock bottom?
I think it was being in a black space in my head, not knowing what was wrong, and then sitting in that family room in the dark, looking at TV, trying to find anything that would give me stimulation, being on a computer. I didn't use the computer all that much for pornography because it was a work tool to me, because I was in IT all the time. So I just didn't look at it in that kind of vein, although I did some. But it was that, just the blackness of it. I just didn't know where my life was going and what purpose I had. I mean, suicide ran through my head more than once. I didn't see an out. None of what she did had any resonance with me until we were, and we had all this stuff, and we were at this meeting in the AA clubhouse, and we got to the end, and there was this gentleman, a very nice fella, must weigh about 400 pounds. He got up, and we had do chips, and he said, would anybody like a white chip for 24 hours? And I raised my hand, and no planning. I think my wife almost fell off the chair, went up. I remember this guy, big guy, I'm not a big guy, gave me a big bear hug. I can still feel it today, and welcoming me. And it was the beginning of a journey that I'm still on and I love.
And that was kind of your first experience in a meeting that was for you, correct?
That's right. And I looked at those steps, and by the time the meeting was over, I was sure I'd done steps 1, 2, and 3. Got it. But I certainly didn't want to go on to 4 or 5 or any of that. And I thought in my head, well, maybe in a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, when we got back to Cape Cod, my wife went to a particular meeting. It's a very good one. And she said, you really ought to get a sponsor. So I did. And it happened to be through AA. And the guy said, I'll be happy to sponsor you. And he said, but you got to do the steps. Here I was, a Catholic convert, having a Jewish sponsor. And this guy owned a construction company, and he had me come over in the morning and spend an hour and a half with me once a week, stop the clock, no work, in his conference room, a program called Back to Basics. I don't know if you know it, but it's an accelerated program to go through the 12 steps like the old days. But my 4 weeks became 9. And we went through it all. And I remember when we got to step 3, he said, well, here we kneel down and say the 3rd step prayer. And I'm thinking, I'm going to kneel down here at the table, hold hands with this Jewish guy that I have nothing in common with, and say the 3rd step prayer. Hair on the back of my neck stood up, and it still gives me chills. I'm today at a meeting, and I told him about my sex addiction problem. He said, well, it's just another manifestation of the same situation, which I've come to find that it isn't the medication. It's really not lust. It's fear, anger, and resentment. And those character defects that I never dealt with, that I pushed down, pain became intense, and I had to find a way to medicate it. Could be work, could be alcohol, could be sex, whatever. About the only thing I didn't do that I'm aware of is drugs. That was just because it just didn't present themselves. I would have been probably happily to be in that too. So addictive.
No, that's really interesting, and I love the experience you shared, kneeling down with as you said, your Jewish sponsor that you had no, religious type real similarities with, but it was this life-changing hair on the back of your neck standing up experience.
Absolutely. And another time was we were coming upon the 9th step, and we were going through things, and we had the lists and everything. He said, these 2 people seem to keep coming up as your major problem. He said, I want you to make amends to them. Well, they were off the Cape, and I kind of procrastinated, but I was going to come to see him that following week. And as I was driving to his office, I said, well, I'll call him the phone. In this era of voicemail, I'll get the voicemail and I'll just say, hi, this is Joe, give you a call sometime. Each of them answered. And then, I wasn't sure what the 9th step was really all about. And I started out by saying what I'm supposed to say. I'm here to I'm in a 12-step program. I'm here to make amends for the things I did. And I got about that far in both cases. And each of them said, oh, we should be making amends to you. Now, that doesn't always happen to someone, but it happened for me. And it was another incredible moment, because coming out of that, it was like, well, how did I reach them? But more importantly, that for the first time in about 30 years, I didn't have this burning resentment for each one. And I started to realize that what I resented was things that I could have dealt with, but I didn't. And it was really my problem, that we had a problem, not theirs.
Yeah. No, that's a great experience. And that was your first experience with working your step 9, basically, right?
Yes, it was.
Man, those are some good ones to get kicked off with,
And it just made all the difference. Now, if I could talk to you and get myself all fired up about either one of them, but I don't. And all of this in the program and the steps, even though I know we're going to talk about step 7, and I'll tell you why it's so important to me, but they've all opened me up.
Yeah.
They've all gradually caused me to find peace, to live my life smaller, in the sense of not spans of time, but just today. And it all paid itself off this year, because my wife suddenly started to deteriorate. When we were in Florida, we came back, and she went in the hospital on June 2nd, and I stayed with her through it all. And on June 28th, I was planning her funeral. It was just the worst of times. We were extremely close, and I had the program. I had all these people in other states and other countries that I could connect with, text, email, talk. I didn't have to, I don't know how I would have handled that otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's carried me through everything. I was just in a meeting. We were talking today, as I mentioned, and I said, I just don't know where I would be now if I didn't have the program, the work I've done, what the steps have done for me. So I can actually, at her funeral, I gave the talk, and it came to me that morning, the opening of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. That was my year. It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. It's okay, because the program gave me something I never had, a family. It gave me a way of life, and it gave me a connection with a higher power that I don't claim to understand, but call God.
Yeah.
I was not a person who didn't believe, but after I got into the program for a while, I came to realize I didn't have faith. Now I do. And it was almost once I got into the program and got settled down, my wife and I had close to a 24/7 running program, because she's in it, I'm in it, we're so connected. She used to start to tell people, well, Joe's ever the good student. He knows the program better than I do now. You know, she's the one who said one day when we were down in Key West, you know, it might be a nice idea if you got on your knees by the bed in the morning and asked for help. And I'm like, I'm not 3 years old. I don't have to get on my knees. And it was awkward in the beginning, but what it was doing was giving me a sense of humility. Now I can't imagine not getting up in the morning, getting on my knees, asking for help. And at the end of the day, no matter what I'm dragging on the ground, I don't fail to get on my knees and thank God for what he gave me and ask for help through the night, because I have a disease of the mind that keeps working at night when I'm attempting to sleep.
Let me do a quick review of some things you shared that were really meaningful to me and kind of came back around as you were sharing this last time. So some of your difficulties as a child was making friends. You didn't feel accepted. You had a hard time connecting with people. And then as you grew, as you aged and came through life, you weren't able to have children. So you didn't have this nuclear family. You had nieces, nephews, and extended family and your wife. But the children wasn't something that was there to help provide an additional foundation. You've come into recovery, and all of a sudden you shared that the light came on. You were able to talk with people and have real conversations and make real friendships with people. And then your wife is suddenly, she pretty quickly passes away. I mean, the process of it sounds like it came pretty quickly. Now, if you had not got into a recovery place and into a place where you didn't have those types of friends that are all over the world, how do you think that experience with your wife suddenly passing would have gone?
It wouldn't have been good. It would have been really ugly. I just don't know how I could have. I can't even imagine how I would have dealt with it. You know, the 24/7 intensity of seeing her go, the after. You know, I have a nice extended family through her, and they're great, but so many program people. For the first 5 months, I couldn't respond to all the cards, letters, etc. And I just started doing that about 3 weeks ago. I mean, she got like 22 mass cards. I've got piles of cards everywhere. And a lot of those cards are coming from neighbors, from people in program. I should say that as of today, I've never been to a face-to-face SA meeting. All of it's been on the phone. I got involved on the phone because there weren't anything locally. I had the AA meetings for face-to-face. And I became quite active, and I'm now the secretary of the 8:30 a.m. Eastern and the 4 p.m. Eastern daily sobriety renewal. When I got involved, there were like 5 people. We have an average of 50 to 60 people on the calls now. I'm also secretary of the phone-in voice over intercom protocol, secretary of the virtual intergroup. I've started speaking. Matter of fact, I'll be down in Nashville and on a couple of panels. So,
Wow. Well, that's really neat. Thank you, man. Good background, good experience, good painful life experience that really your recovery and your relationship with God and with others, your fellow man, has to this point really lifted you and saved you, basically, right?
yep.
That's awesome.
Totally.
So let's start moving into step 7, and I'm going to read what. Actually, why don't you? I'm sure you've got it. What does tell me the key principle or the phrase, the bullet point phrase that step 7 is, and then let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, there's lots of things on step 7, but the best description of it, which resonates the most powerfully, is found in step 12 of the 12 and 12. You get at the bottom of the second page. Now we're going into step 12, but before we do, let's go back and review what we've covered in the first 11 steps. And you probably read this.
Mm-hmm.
It says, then in step 7, we humbly asked God to remove our shortcomings, such as he could or would under the conditions of the day we asked. And that progressively has resonated more and more with me, because it's really saying that you never get it. It's just today. And the conditions it speaks about are not related to God. They're related to me. How well I'm inculcating the steps into my life, how well prepared I am to be a person walking in recovery. Because as it says at the end of step 3 in the White Book, that famous little couplet, I can't without God, God won't without me. And that's just a refinement on that, saying a different way, that God will do it, but I have to. And it's not like step 4. You do an inventory, you clean out the trash can, and maybe you remember something later, but you can actually do that. But you can't do 6 and 7. I have taken to saying to people when they ask me about it that I live inside 6 and 7. Because I really believe that. I heard one guy in West Palm Beach say that one time. I said, my God, the first person I've ever said, I don't believe you can perfect any of the steps, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
My first sponsor said he had 29 years at that point. He said he's still working on 1, 2, and 3, trying to do them all.
Yeah, and I love that. So living inside steps 6 and 7, step 6 reads, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And then 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. So we're talking about character defects, shortcomings.
Whatever you want to call them. Emotional tics. Call them anything you want. But they're the things that make up your humanity. They're not things that you ever lose. They're always going to be with you. It's how you deal with them. And I try to tell guys I sponsor, if you really gotten into the steps and you really worked them, you won't be troubled by your character defects. You'll celebrate them because that's your humanity. It doesn't mean you have to live them. You don't have to act on them. I don't have to be the procrastinator I was at times. I don't have to be the person who wants you to think the best of me, and I'll tell you anything I can to get you to do that. I don't have to tell fibs, lies, whatever you want to call them, to make myself look better in your eyes. And I could slip back into that easily if I didn't keep doing what I'm supposed to do every day, because I truly believe that programs like inertia. You either go forward or you go backward. You do not stay status quo. It's an everyday event.
So as you came into, working your steps and came to step 7, do you remember kind of how your sponsor talked to you about step 7 and maybe even step 6? Because they do kind of work together.
Well, they do, but oftentimes they become less the focus, I've found with people. The focus is on 4 and 5. You go, oh, an inventory, and I'll share it. And so many people don't get beyond there. It's really they get there, and as my wife once said about herself, I pole faulted over 6, 7, 8, and 9 to 10. I heard this said one time. It's not my makeup, but it really resonated. 4 and 5 was when you become in touch with yourself. You begin to know who you really are. In 6 and 7, you start to develop a personal relationship with that power that greater than yourself. You may call God or something else. And in 8 and 9, you finish that 180-degree turn, and you become connected to society and are willing to have relationships with people. Then 10, 11, and 12 support all of that. But it's in 4 through 9 that you're say facing the north, and you gradually turn completely 180 degrees and face a different direction, and you see life in a different way because you, for the first time, know who you are. You know what you can and can't do on your own, and you understand that the rest of humanity is okay, and you can connect with them, and they're as human as you are.
Yeah. Well, I really like that. And I've recently heard or read or that, steps 1 through 3 are the connection steps, connecting to God. Steps 4 through 9 are the correction steps, where I'm correcting, like you said, I'm going south, I need to turn back north, and I'm correcting that. And then 10 through 12 are like the direction steps. Hey, okay, what do I need to do now?
They're all important, and they're all interconnected. They're like that great arch that Bill Wilson talked to, and the others in the big book, or they're like an endless circle that you keep continually go around. They're all important. They're all interconnected. You can't leave any of them out, or you won't be successful.
Yeah. So tell me how working your step 7 looks on a daily basis.
Well, every morning I do 6 and 7 on my knees. Not because God doesn't know what my character defects are. I need to be sure I remember what they are. And I need to consciously turn them over to God. Ask Him to take them. And I ask for 3 gifts. I ask for the humility to know that I can't do any of this on my own. Only He can lift them from me. I ask Him, secondly, for the willingness to get off my knees and live the 12 steps in every facet of my life, not just on recovery, but in every facet. And finally, I ask for rigorous honesty, that I don't self-deceive. I was always cash register honest. I didn't lie on my tax returns, but I definitely wasn't rigorously honest. I give myself excuses. I ignore things. I promise what I wouldn't deliver, all of that kind of thing. Now, if I have those 3 things and I actually do them, I've said it to people, guys I sponsor, and I believe it myself. I have a lock on 24 hours, but only 24. Then I got up in the morning and do it again.
Do it again. So there's a phrase in the big book when it comes to steps, when it comes to the word humility, and it has to do with step 7. And it's the phrase right-sized. So what does the term right-sized mean to you in step 7? Is that something you are familiar with?
Oh, I'm aware. What the term humility is used in the context of recovery is totally different from what most people think of humility as being. It's like, oh, and I'm humble and I'm not. It isn't that at all. To me, it's the clear recognition there are certain things I can't do for myself, and only that God that I don't completely understand can do for me. I can't get rid of. I mean, God knows in the decades that I was there, I tried to get rid of character defects. I never was successful on my own. It was only when I started asking God to intercede and then use the tools I believe He directly gave us that those things begin to change.
And that's kind of what that means to be right-sized. Hey, I'm not mouse-like. I'm not cowering in a corner humble.
No,
But it's also, I'm not this
I can do it all.
God type thing,
But I can do it all. Oh yeah, I was my own God for sure.
Yeah, and I think that the work ethic, which can be a very positive, and work ethic is a positive thing.
Oh yeah.
But workaholism takes that to the extreme, right?
Well, it's like almost everything. Fear isn't a bad thing. You don't want to put your hand in a fire. You're afraid to burn. Anger isn't a bad thing. When you see somebody beating up another person, you can get angry about that. But we just take those and we run with them and we turn them in on ourselves. They lose their functional purpose that God do it.
So which of your character defects, if you'd like to share this, is your favorite one, the one that you love to hold on to, and it's the hardest one for you to give up on a daily basis?
Resentment.
Why?
Because it's too easy to find fault in other people rather than look at yourself. So there's a tendency to drift back into that. And I don't do that now, or at least if I do, it's only momentarily before I catch myself. But any of those things can take me out. I have to realize who I am, where I am, what I'm doing. I have to realize when I'm around people, especially of the female persuasion, that they're real human beings. And one of the things I read one time that was most helpful was, and this is taking the Christian side of things, but I read it's that when you look at a person and you want to make them into a lust object, see the words, Jesus died for me on their forehead, or God created me. Then they lose the objectivity and become that human being that you think you are. And it changed it, the way I looked at everything, and still does. I mean, some of the guys I sponsor, they get all concerned because they see a good-looking woman and they're like, wow, well, you're not dead. A great old saying that comes from Billy Graham. I'm sure he got it from someone else. He said, birds can fly over your head, but you don't have to let them nest in your hair. So you see that and you move on. You know what it is. If it's bothering you, you turn it over. Roy Kay, in some of his later writings, said he had this prayer. You probably heard it. He said, every day before I go out anywhere, I say, God, keep me sober from every lust today. God, keep me sober in every lust today. Because he knew it was going to happen. And it wasn't like, wait till you get there and then ask for help. You ask for help before you even get there because it's going to happen. You're going to see things. You're a human being. You're a person of the flesh. You just is. And he's right. The 3-second rule, there's not a half a second rule. You are what you are. You're that addict. You'll always be that addict. You need to understand it and create a structure for yourself that you operate in comfortably. So you can just live your life. You can be out in the community. You can go anywhere. I mean, I've been traveling of late since my wife died to France. I went to South Africa and around and about. And I'm through airports and everything, and I don't have the same problems I used to have. It's all the program. It's all the steps. It's all developing a relationship to God. I'm just don't have to do those things. And that's no credit to me. That's a credit to the program, what it offered me, and the fact I totally believe in it. It's amazing. If I could, if I was king of the world, I'd have everybody do those steps. Whether they're an active addict or not, it'll change their lives.
I'm kind of on your side there. I'm not a big one on forcing people to do anything, but I have found such peace in the steps.
But if I could, I'd just say, come, try it out. You'll be amazed.
Yeah. No, I love that. So, as you reflect on your journey in recovery, and as you and I think your introduction to the recovery program is a little bit different than most because your wife had already been in it for 40 years,
Oh yeah.
very active, and so you kind of had, I don't want to say a soft landing in walking into the doors, but you were familiar with it. You had seen the signs. You'd been there.
Yeah.
But so many people that I talk to, and myself included, when I finally hit that rock bottom and went, I got to do something other than what I've been trying, because obviously what I've been trying for
Right.
decades is not working. But I don't want to walk it through those doors. I am
Yep.
so ashamed of that. How would you invite somebody to walk through those doors the first time, to give them the courage, I guess, to do so?
Um, it really is. I'm not going to tell you what'll happen, but I will tell you that if you do, a miracle will enter your life. If you just come. I'm not going to promise you when it'll happen, but the best four-letter word I ever found in the program to use on someone who is undecided about what's going to happen: stay. Just stay. You don't have to believe. Believe that I believe it. Believe that I'm telling you what worked for me, not what a book says. But if you stay, you will get what I got.
Hmm.
And if you make recovery the first thing in your life, before your wife, before your kids, before your work, before your church, every one of those will be better. And any one of them you put before, you put at risk of losing, because it's in recovery that everything else works. And that's not quantitatively, because I'll hear people talk about, oh, they have this ritual that they do. They read for an hour and a half, and they do this and that. I'm like, that's nice, but it's qualitative. It's not quantitative.
Hmm.
Some guys, I'll hear go 5 meetings in a day. It's a wonderful thing to do that. But that alone isn't going to bring you to sobriety. It might get you dry for a while, but there are 3 stages of recovery to me. There's being dry, there's being sober, and then there's actually being.
Yeah, so actually that's a question I want to ask you and have you define maybe. And you mentioned those 3 phases of recovery, and in my own experience, or in the things I work with my sponsees on, is I ask them periodically, define for me today what the word abstinence means, what the word sobriety means, what recovery means, and what healing means. So I'm going to ask you that. Tell me how you would define each of those phrases: abstinence, sobriety, recovery, and healing.
Well, abstinence just means you're not using. It doesn't mean you've necessarily changed. Abstinence can come from white knuckles. Sobriety, you're in somewhat, and you go to meetings maybe, and you do some of the things some of the time that the program asks of you. But recovery is when it becomes your way of life. It isn't just about not medicating. It's not just about defining it as this silo of activities called the program. It's when it becomes throughout your life. It's in every part of your life. It's actually when you start to live the full part of the 12th step. So many people think of the 12th step as you're helping another addict. That's about 40% of what that step talks about. The 60% talks about changing you in all facets of your life. That's where recovery happens. And necessarily, if you're doing that for a while, peace starts to enter your life and healing happens. If you're peaceful, you're at peace with who you are, where you are. Like I said to someone, they were asking me about after my wife died and everything. And I said, well, sure, I'm sad about it, and I'm lonely for her. but I know who I am. I know what I'm doing, and I know where I'm going. That's recovery.
Mm. Ooh, I love that definition. I know who I am, where I'm going, what I'm doing, where I'm going. I love that. What? So before I wrap this up, I've got a couple more questions. But is there anything else in regards to step 7 that you feel is vital that you can share to help somebody better understand it?
It's really knowing who you are, uncovering through what the steps give you who this person is that I call Joe, what his makeup is, and that if I'm willing to accept who I am and release it to that God, and I refer to it as the God of my not understanding. A lot of people, what do you mean? I don't understand God. If I understood God, I'd be God. I don't, but I trust him, and he sees me through. If I do that and then use those tools he gave me, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to have a good day. And I didn't have a lot of good days before March 29th, 2012.
Mm.
Now I have good days. Even in losing my wife, even in the trauma of that, and all of that, I have good days.
Mm.
I've got friends. I've got the program. And I've got a God that I know I can talk to.
Mm.
And he cares. And I've come to use this phrase, but I believe God created all of us in perfection. And now we're on that journey back to that same perfection. And he gave us the tools to get there, but it's like, okay, now are you going to use them? He gave us this beautiful gift called free will, and it cuts both ways. Now we are given the tools to show us how to use our free will in the best possible way. If we do, we get a good life. We get a peaceful life, and a comfortable one. Where you're comfortable inside your skin, that I can sit here and talk to a guy I've never met before and tell him more about myself than I've ever told another human being prior to March 29, 2012.
Hmm. Wow.
More than I even told my wife in 40 some years. I was always masked. Now I'm not afraid to let anybody know who I am. It's okay. I am who I am.
All the beautiful and all the warts, huh?
Yeah. And it's okay. I'm good with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I first got in recovery, and I went through a couple of years, and I got to a couple of years of recovery, I thought, well, man, I can't get any better than this. Then I got to the third year, and I said, gee, it can't get any better than that. And last May, I got my 7-year chip coin, and I said, well, I figured it out. It is better than it ever was, and probably will be better when I get my 8th one.
Yeah. One day at a time, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about it. I really, truly, my life is one day at a time.
Yeah. You know, there's a verse of scripture in Matthew. It's in the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes,
Yep.
that, you know, I never really understood until just a couple of years ago. And maybe I still don't understand it, but it makes sense to me now. Sufficient is the evil unto the day thereof. Does that verse mean anything to you in terms of recovery?
Well, I think so. I mean, you know, I haven't thought on it, so I'm going to be throwing off. But whatever happens today, and just leave it. I tell people that have fallen over, that have acted out, whatever. Okay, you did. Now, what are you learning from it? That's all that it serves. Learn from it so you don't have to repeat it, so you can go forward. Not very many people come in program and have a straight line out. They have the ups and downs. Some of them, quote unquote, slip.
Mm-hmm.
Is a euphemism I'm not happy, but when it's used in terms of sobriety, last, and priority, it makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
That's what happens. People don't just slip. It's been coming. They just have ignored it. But it's funny you mentioned that because you may know this, but Dr. Bob Smith, one of the co-founders, in his last public talk before he died, said there are three things that underpin recovery. Matthew 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the chapter on love, and the book of James. And when you've been in program for a while and you read those, you say, oh my God, the program has been around forever. It just took a couple of guys that were drunks on Skid Row and had all kinds of problems to kind of bring it together, and it hasn't changed in 80 years.
Yeah.
I heard somebody say one time, what are the two things that came out of the 30s that have remained and unchanged? One is Social Security, and the other is the 12-step program.
Yeah. You'd be hard-pressed to find anything else, huh?
Right.
Yeah. Very interesting. Oh, very cool. So Joe, there are going to be lots of people hearing this at some point in the future and listening to this who are on the fence, maybe in denial, saying, I don't have a problem. Maybe it's a spouse or a loved one of somebody who has a problem, but that person doesn't want to say anything about it. What hope or what advice or thoughts can you give to those people to provide some hope and some motivation to press forward and not sit and in the muck and mire?
Listen to people in the program. Listen to people laughing and smiling that you're not. Listen to them telling how their life was at one point and how their life has become. You can have that. Stay. The miracle will happen.
I love that. Stay. That's a new 4-letter word that I think I'll be using a lot more in my life now. That's good stuff. One last question, and then we'll wrap it up, unless you have anything else you want to share after that. The one last question is, how do you work your step 12 in your life?
Oh, well, from a program point of view, I sponsor guys. It took me a while to realize I sponsor everybody the same way. Some are very successful. Some are modestly successful. Some of them fall flat on their faces, which proved to me I have nothing to do with their recovery. I just share my experience, strength, and hope. But more importantly, I try to carry the program across everything that I do, all of my interactions with people, how I see them, trying to not think I know what their motivations are. I really try as much as I'm capable of doing to live that serenity prayer. Because the only thing I can change is me. I can't change anyone else. I want to have the courage to change me. But at the end, it's God's will, not mine, that'll be done. And so often I hear in meetings the first 3 stanzas said, and not the 4th one. And that's probably the most important one in the serenity prayer. Thy will, not mine, be done. And it's okay, because his will may not be mine. My will wasn't for my wife to die. But that was the way it was. And toward the end, it was close to the end. When this all came up, the family asked me, you're not going to tell Margaret about what's going on? I said, of course I am. Because if I lie to her, she'll find out and then she won't trust me for anything. So we were down to the end, and she was in that state where people they get comatose, but they still hear. And I leaned over to her and said, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't want you to go. But I know you're going to need to, and it's okay. That's what the program gave me, my friend.
Awesome. Joe, thank you so much for sharing your life, your faith, your strength, your hope, your experience.
And it gets better. That's the greatest thing I know. It'll get better.
Well, there you have it. It will get better.
Thanks again, Joe. I'm so glad that I got to meet you and have that conversation with you. Remember, If you have found value in RICO 12, please consider supporting us, whether it be financially, whether it be by sharing the message with others, carrying this message in all your affairs. If you find value, please consider rating and reviewing in the podcast platform of your choice. And remember, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Keep coming back. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together.